people on? Andrew's on?
Yeah, Andrew's on.
And somebody else is on. Is it Chaim? I don't know. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We're up to Daf Kuf Nun Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the bottom, 15 lines from the bottom. Mishnah says that you're not allowed to talk about weekday activities on Shabbos, but you're allowed to think about them. Says the Gemara, is it forbidden indeed to talk on Shabbos about business? Well, and I'm sorry, but we're disconnected. Tolly's going to record it. Please record if you don't mind. Record it. If it goes off, it will still be on the recording. But really, we don't have. Can you record it?
Yeah.
Right. Sorry about that. It went off suddenly, the Zoom. Not because of the internet or anything, just suddenly went off. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. The Gemara says that you're not allowed to talk. Faith the Gemara. You're allowed to make cheshbonis of mitzvah on Shabbos. That's even though you're talking. You're allowed to say, to go around the shul and say how much money you're giving to the poor people on Shabbos. You're allowed to get deal with pikuach nefesh and public issues. Public issues, even if it's not a mitzvah, just to build a new bridge, to build a new road, even that's mutter on Shabbos. You're allowed to go to shul, you're allowed to even make a meeting on Shabbos. That is theatres, circuses, and blastedics. That's how it's translated, where there are areas where the goyim would gather together. You're allowed to use these places on Shabbos just to deal with business. You're allowed to get involved in shidduchim on Shabbos. Or you're allowed to employ somebody to teach your son, and even to teach him a profession. Because Rashi brings out the Gemara in Kedushin, that a person who doesn't have a business will end up becoming a ganav. So teaching somebody to become a lawyer, an accountant, or anything like that, or any business, is allowed on Shabbos. You're allowed to say to somebody, will you teach my son a business? That means, originally the Gemara says is speech forbidden. We see that speech is okay, because we see they're allowed to in all these cases. And the Gemara says, wait a second, those cases are all cases of mitzvah. Mitzvah one is allowed to, but generally one is forbidden. You're allowed to do calculations which have no consequences. Malacha are things that you don't need. For example, if I was to say that to build the Empire State Building would require 100,000 bricks or 1,000,000 bricks, so that's a cheshbon, but it's nothing to do. It has no effect. Mabekach is that it's cheshbonos that a person would. What's the word? Malacha is when it's not for you, meaning because it's not negaya to you. Mabekach, it's got no cheshbon for anybody. It's just simply calculations which have no value. For example, because in that one you could say the first one you could say, well, if somebody else wants to build the Empire State Building, so they need so many bricks. But here, since the end of the day, Malacha means that neither for me nor for you it's negaya. Mabekach is just cheshbonos where, for example, where nobody would have any effect. They're saying things like the amount of drops of water in the sea and things like that, where you're making calculations, mathematical calculations, but they don't actually have any consequences. Cheshbonos that have passed the shasidim years that are going to be also the cheshbon. The Gemara will explain it later. Shemalacha, tafel kufnun with beis, v'shemabekach, or cheshbonos which are not negaya, muter lechashbon. You're allowed to. And the Gemara is like this: so minu cheshbon cheshbonos shel tzrichim v'chashbon cheshbonos shel tzrichim l'Shabbos. You're allowed to make cheshbonos which are not important, but not cheshbonos which are important. Ketzad? A person is allowed to say on Shabbos, I had to get 100 workers to plow this field. I paid £100,000 for my house. We mustn't say this is how much I spent and this is how much I'm going to spend. Now the Gemara asks, this whole brisa is contradictory and it contradicts the previous brisa. Because in the previous verse it says things that are not important you don't eat is mutter. But it says cheshbonish of which have already been is also. And even in this verse itself, first it says it's permitted and then it says it's also. The verse itself is contradictory. That means if I say I paid £100,000 for my house and I've paid all my workers and there's no nafkamina lamaisa at all, then there's no problem talking about it on Shabbos. But if I say I paid £100,000 and I still owe 30,000 to the workers, so then these calculations start becoming practical and they have nafkaminas. And since they have nafkaminas, it's forbidden to do it on Shabbos. And now the Gemara brings in machshichin tonu abon ma'aser v'chosed echad sheniftzaloi pered b'seich v'sadeu. That he was walking in this field on Shabbos and he notices that there's a hole in the fence. He decided I'm going to build the fence. Now, is anything wrong with thinking on Shabbos I want to build a fence? But what would you pass? Are you allowed to think on Shabbos I want to build a fence? Oh, thinking is okay. So did he do anything wrong? Nope. But he remembered it's Shabbos. So he decided that because it's Shabbos and I thought about it on Shabbos, a double chumrah. Thinking is okay. And he decided to take upon himself a kapara for thinking that he won't do it anymore. But now, I decided not to build it, and this happened also by slaf caper berries. What's so special about the caper berry? Does anybody remember? There's 4 different parts which are edible. The tree is edible, the leaves are edible, the fruit are edible, and the blossoms are edible. And his business succeeded very greatly. So we see over here that even though we just give a whole list of things that is permitted, then you're allowed to talk on Shabbos about how much you spent on your house. If you don't owe any money and nobody else is planning to buy the exact same house. But nevertheless, there's a chumrah not to do any of this. You're allowed to say, tomorrow I am going to Gateshead. You're allowed to say, tomorrow I'm going to Gateshead. You're not allowed to say, tomorrow I'm driving to Gateshead on Shabbos, because driving is forbidden. You're allowed to say, tomorrow I'm going to Gateshead. Why? Because if there would be huts the entire way, one would be allowed to go. So you're not actually talking about an Aveil. Not allowed to go on Shabbos. That you should be ready once the Shabbos get workers and bring fruit. To employ workers, you're not allowed to on Shabbos employ workers. Therefore, talking on Shabbos, you want to employ workers, it's forbidden. I love you, but to bring fruit, maybe. At the end of the day, if I say on Shabbos, I'm going to bring fruit from Gateshead, any problem? No. Because theoretically it is possible to build a wall from here to Gateshead, enclose it, and you're allowed to. So what's wrong on Shabbos being machshichin al atchum to bring fruit? And says the Gemara, we're talking about fruit which is still on the tree. So if I on Shabbos say I'm walking towards Gateshead in order to pluck fruit from the tree, that's already no good. Because then it's impossible to do it. And even to start walking on Shabbos, if everybody knows, the reason is because you want to harvest the fruit, it's also. Says the Gemara, you're not allowed to bring straw and stubble. Cash is still growing. It's when you cut wheat, you still got a little bit of left on the ground. So that you can understand, you're not allowed to on Shabbos. What is straw? Straw is cut grain. There's no issa on Shabbos to collect it. Why? Others carrying the answer, not necessarily, because you can make mechitzas. We're talking about where it's gone moldy. Since it's gone moldy, so therefore it is muktzah. So therefore, since it is muktzah, you can't anymore gather it. So therefore, if I on Shabbos plan to gather straw which has gone moldy, I'm doing an issa, and there's no way it can be mutter. That means for a dead person or for a kala, since it is a mitzvah to be dealing, person who's dealing with the Chelek Kedusha is doing a mitzvah. So for same thing, a person who tachlos kala, so if you're allowed to on Shabbos go to start getting yourself ready for all these things. So then the kimim daik, and it's the kala meis and it's gacheloi. But if it would be for something else, not a meis or kala, be forbidden. In the olden days, they would put an hadas branch, which is very, very pretty, around the kala's head. So if I want to go on Shabbos to go and cut an hadas branch, so I'm allowed to on Shabbos walk with intention, even though everybody knows I'm about to do an Aveira. I'm not doing it on Shabbos. I'm not going to cut the branch on Shabbos. I'm just walking on Shabbos. So that Motzei Shabbos, I can go and cut the branch. Since it's a tzorech mitzvah, it is okay. Mashenkin, if it would be not for tzorech mitzvah, let's say I just fancy making my house beautiful by hanging hadas leaves around, so it would be also. So that's what we would like. That for kala, yes, for everybody else it's forbidden. Elo mace, my new love over tachrichin. But mace, what do you do for mace? You bring him tachrichin and on. Victoni mace and avlacheloi. But my maybe. If the whole problem by a mace is you want to bring an oven, there's no issa. Or you get to say it's out of the rishus. No, because you can in theory build walls and then be within the rishus. And says the Gemara, mace tam mishkachas al mizgalei glimo. And let's say, for example, you need to cut for him cloth in order to make them tachrichin. So that is something which is no way you could do it beheta on Shabbos. So therefore, that is what the Gemara says over here, that it is forbidden to do it, al das to do it for afterwards. The Mishnah says you're allowed to go on Shabbos to stand at the very edge of the tchum in order to do certain things like to guard the food. Even without Havdalah. You're not allowed to do any malacha before Havdalah. They will stand at the end of the tchum. And he'll say Havdalah Shmonesa, Atuchanan Tonu, even if you do Havdalah in Davdi, you still need to do Havdalah again. Maybe you make a kimta. That indeed, he's standing there 2,000 hours away from the town and makes Havdalah on a cup. Have you ever heard of anybody finding Havdalah products at the end of the tchum? He's standing there to go and guard his field. What's the chances that they'll find Havdalah necessities there? And says the Gemara, we're talking about the time when everybody's pressing the wine. Since everybody's pressing the wines, so therefore then there's an abundance of wine everywhere. So therefore he'll be able to do Havdalah. There's so to say a different pshat. They say as follows. That means you said that we're talking about where there's abundance of wine. Because of the fact that we're talking about the time of the wine pressing, I don't need to come on to such a kimta. But Emma's, we're talking about the normal time of the year, and there's no wine. But all you need to do is to say, and then you're allowed to do malach, and that's how we pass nowadays. That means, of course, one should not delay Havdalah unnecessarily, but one is allowed to do malachas as long as one said, you do not need to do Havdalah before you do your work. Says who just said the words and would start chopping wood. So you see that you're allowed to chop wood even though you haven't yet done Havdalah. Is a right from this Gemara, you just need to say and you're allowed to straight away do malacha. The Mishnah finishes off with the principle of Abba Shol. What's Abba Shol's principle? That anything that you're allowed to say, you're allowed to walk to the end of the tchum. Says the Gemara, Abba Shol Ahai. Which case is Abba Shol going on? In the Mishnah, there were two cases. The Mishnah starts off that you don't stand at the end of the tchum to employ workers. But you're allowed to be machshich al tchum to bring fruit. So Abba Shol Ahai, if he's going on the first case, which says it's forbidden, you're not allowed to stand at the end of the tchum to employ workers to bring fruit. Top of Kuf Nun Aleph from Aleph. Abba Shol should not be talking about what you're permitted. Abba Shol should be saying what you're forbidden. What's the first case of Mishnah saying? That you're not allowed to go at the end of the tchum to start employing workers, because that's something you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So Abba Shol should conclude, I make a rule out of it, that anything you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to say. Why do you say anything that you are allowed to? You're obviously not talking about that halacha. Allah Sefer. You're allowed to stand there in order to guard your food. It's not the way around. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to stand at the end of the tchum because it's something which, in the end of the day, is not an issa on Shabbos. Meaning, there's nothing intrinsically wrong on Shabbos of walking up and down your field to make sure that no birds or foxes or people steal your fruit. You're allowed to do that on Shabbos afternoon, right? Imagine you've got a massive orchard, thousands of apple trees. You're allowed to walk up and down Shabbos afternoon and nobody takes your fruit. Now, are you allowed to walk out of the tchum? No. You are allowed to walk to the end of tchum on Shabbos in order to be in preparation that Motzei Shabbos immediately you can be watching over your fruit. The reason is because theoretically speaking, if the field would be within the tchum, it would be mutter to do it. So therefore, when you're doing something which doesn't obviously show you're doing a malacha, if I start walking out of the tchum in order because I want to go shopping, which is forbidden on Shabbos, I'm not allowed to do. But I'm allowed to walk to the end of the tchum to do something which theoretically, technically could be mutter if it would be within the tchum. What? That's right. If somebody would see me, they'd say, you're going to look after the food, but that not necessarily is forbidden. He doesn't know if I've got an eruv of tchum in there, etc. So if that's the case, why is Abba Shol talking about that which is permitted to say? you're allowed to walk to the end of the tchum. No, that which you're allowed, because that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is talking about that you're allowed to go to the end of the tchum, so that which you're allowed to say, you should say the other way around. So God says, Lo'ila ma'asefekoi. Abba Shul ha'koi. Abba Shul is going on the diuk of the Mishnah. Doma v'yodam ha'shmol, motel odam lo'ima lechavoi, shmoli perish v'tchumoch, v'adesh v'lecha perish v'tchumi. You're allowed to, let's say I live in Manchester, you live in Gateshead. And what happens is my properties are in Gateshead, and your properties are in Manchester. We're allowed to make a deal on Shabbos. Every Shabbos, you watch my properties, and I watch your properties. I can't get to Gateshead on Shabbos because it's far to my tchum. But if there would be in Manchester, I'd be allowed to walk up and down to check out my properties. Okay, I'm allowed to ask you to look after my properties in order that I should look after your properties. That's mutter. From here, we see a very fundamental halacha, which is a very interesting halacha. On Shabbos, there's an issa called amir alakum. For example, you're not allowed on Shabbos to tell someone to carry something for you, to light something for you, to cook, put the shalot on. What about amir Yehudi? Is there an issa to ask a yid to do malacha for you? For example, very common in the summer, you bring in Shabbos early, and suddenly you remember you didn't put on your shalot. Are you allowed to knock on your Yiddish neighbor? I used to have a Lubavitcher neighbor. He didn't bring in Shabbos, you can't imagine until what time. So am I allowed to knock on his door and say to him, can you put the lights on? What would you say? Mutter also. No, it's mutter. Why? Because over here the Gemara says, because there's no Issa Amir L'Akum. Chazal only made the Issa of Amir, there's no Issa Amir L'Yehudi. There only is Issa Amir L'Akum. And we see from this over here, because the Gemara over here is talking about, I ask you to look after my property in Gateshead. But the reality is, I can't get to Gateshead on Shabbos. So for me, it would actually be forbidden. But for you, it is permitted to do it for me.
Better to ask a Goy.
No, actually,
Better to ask you,
better to ask a Yid.
even though it could be some people think it's on Shabbos.
I always become a Shabbos.
Yeah, but a lot of the time it's Shabbos, and it was great. It's also for you.
It's also for me, but I'm not doing the malach. I'm asking you to do it. You not being covered Shabbos. So there's no issa.
Not better to ask
No. Look at this. It's not such. Where is it? Where do I say? Oh, the second thesis. Even if you can't, I mean, it's very good to taste the Rosh Mubarak that even if you can't do something, you're allowed to ask your friend to do a malacha for you on Shabbos. That means, if for him it's mutter, obviously. Says the Gemara, you're allowed to say, look after my food, I look after your food. So Abba Shol extends this rule to all cases. And now the Gemara says, what do we extend to all cases? What's he including? To go and fetch an animal is forbidden. You're not allowed to stand at the end of the tchum to fetch your animal. What happens, halacha is, you're not allowed to carry out of the tchum. What happens if you're standing within the tchum and you've got a dog or a cow out of the tchum? You're allowed to say to them, come, and then the animal comes. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is that you might have thought that if you call the animal, you'll end up going out of the tchum and then lifting it up and bringing it and making malach when animal is forbidden. No, you're allowed to call an animal to come. Which means, and he explains, you're allowed to go on Shabbos and start preparing the things for a kalo, for a mace. You're allowed to say to somebody, another Eid on Shabbos, I want to get a nice musician for my chasna. So will you go to Gateshead and employ for me such and such a singer? If you find nobody good in Gateshead, go to London. If you can't find somebody for a mana, which is 100 zuz, pay 200 zuz. So if you're not allowed to discuss the price. Again, we have three shittas of it. Tanakama says you're only allowed to go to the end of the tchum for something which is permitted to be done if it was within the tchum. Our shul permits for anything which would be a mitzvah, including achnosas kala and avodas hamitz. And he even permits you to discuss prices and to walk and to employ workers all on Shabbos for the sake of achnosas kala and avodas hamitz. Sheikh Rav Yossi says you're allowed to agree to our shul in most cases, except for the price. He doesn't agree that you're allowed to talk about the price. Says the Mishnah. You're allowed to go to the end of the tchum in order to prepare for kalas and for mace. Noch you see over here, choshevet is that get oisik b'mace is mamish oisik b'mitzvah. Nochi shevi chalilim l'Shabbos, a goy that brought flutes on Shabbos for the sake of a yid, lo yisbod ben Yisrael, a yid is not allowed to use them, and can bo mokim kov. That is, since he actually carried them on Shabbos, and he did it for the sake of the yid, you should not carry it, and you shouldn't use it unless it came from nearby, within the town. Also, you cover by Yisrael. If a goy digs on Shabbos a pit for himself, and then afterwards he has no need for it, a yid is allowed to be buried in it. You're never allowed to. This is a very interesting halacha. It's like this, that the halacha is, whenever a goy does malacha, let's say a goy comes to you on Shabbos and says, I made you, I cooked for you something, or I baked for you something, I did a malacha for you. What's the halacha? You're allowed to enjoy it on Shabbos? No, you're not allowed to. A malach, goy does malacha for you on Shabbos, it's awesome. Not only is it awesome, but even Motzei Shabbos, it is awesome. That is the amount of time that it would take you to do it yourself. So let's say you heat up hot water. You have to wait Motzei Shabbos for the amount of time it takes up to heat up water. Here it says that if a goy makes a kvur, it is forbidden forever. Forever, you're never allowed to bury. Why? There's a big shaila in the poskim why it is. One of the reasons which the Mechaber brings it, the Shulchan Aruch brings it, is because it's a ma'aser shebefaheser. It's a public act. Since it's a public act, so therefore it is forbidden. There are poskim that saw that say, therefore, if you've got, let's say, a Yidden on Shabbos doing it publicly an Issa Malacha to fix something, a Yid will never be allowed to use it ever. Oh, that's right. You'll never be allowed to use it. That means if it's a private thing, it's a amount of time it takes not Shabbos to prepare. If it's a public thing, you'll never be allowed to get off it. Okay.
If you, just general rule, if you tell if a goy does something for you, but you didn't intend to do it on Shabbos, he happened to do it on Shabbos, that's more makel? Yeah, fixing your car, anything. You give your car, you give something on Friday, and you said you'll fetch it on Monday.
Right.
Could have been done Friday afternoon. It could have been done Sunday.
As long as I have enough time on Friday to do it, right? So if you give them 5 minutes before Shabbos, 4 hours Shabbos, if you give them 5 minutes before Shabbos, you pick up on Shabbos, then you probably would have done it on Shabbos.
It has to be a nice
Then
time.
you'd have to wait till this year.
Even if you
There's
do Shabbos,
also,
you have to
there's
wait.
two kinds of jobs. There's kablonus and schius. It's a very, very important distinction. There are some jobs that you pay for the job. Some you pay by the hour. Now, even though it's not to do so in Hilchos Shabbos, it makes a very, very big nafkemina. Because people know that by kablonus, when you give something to dry clean, you give something to a garage, everybody knows. If I see, for example, your car, and I'm walking on Shabbos, and I see your car in the garage, and I say, go fixing it. I don't think to myself, they must have employed him to do it on Shabbos. Why? Because the method of kablonus is, you ask him to do a job. It's not according to when he does it. You don't have a fixed time. It's a job that you pay for the job. Schirus is much worse. Schirus, for example, if a guy comes to mow your lawn, usually it is paid by the hour. And that is forbidden, even if, let's say, for example, you say to him, you know what, you come once a week, mow my lawn, I don't care which day. He happens to decide he wants to come to mow your lawn on Shabbos afternoon, that's forbidden. Because then people assume that there's a lot of details over here. But what's chiddush over here is that if a goy digs a hole for a yid, you can never use it. So Moses says, "Mami mokim koi." What does it mean from a nearby place? The more explains what's shaila. Rabba mokim koi. Mam shol ma'chashinon shebechutz lechemo lom. Meaning like this. Rav says, in order for something to be mutter, we have to know that it was within town. So if a goy brings us flutes, we have to know that it came from town. Shmuel says no. Even if it came out of town, as long as it's possible that it came from within town, it's okay. Take about this in Kavasi. The word says it's Medurik like him. There's Shmuel. Diktoni, also on the Chafale Keva, you cover by Yisrael. That if you made him an honor Keva, he is allowed to be, meaning he made it for a goy. I'm a misfake shori. A goy dug a pit, and he didn't specify it for Yid, it's mutter. Why? Because since we don't know it's for Yid, it's okay. Similarly, if a person brings flutes and you're not sure where it came from, it's also mutter. A town where Yidden and Goyim lived there, a mixed town, and there's a bathhouse which gets heated up in Shabbos. If most of them are going, you can go for bath straight after Shabbos. You have to wait for Nacht, and you have to wait, not only have to wait for Nacht, If the majority are Yidam, so the reason people heat up the waters for Yidam, you have to wait till Nacht, plus the amount of time it gets to heat it up. Mechza, also, the amount of time it takes to heat up hot water. So therefore, even though it's only half, so you're not even sure why he did it, one has to be machmir. So we see over here that you have to be machmir mesofik. A small bathhouse, if there's a government, or meaning a powerful man in town, you can wash straight away Motzei Shabbos. My Rishus, if there's an important governor, he's got 10 servants, and he's got 10 servants that all of them can heat up water at the same time, since this guy could actually heat up the water immediately, because he's such a powerful person, he's got so many servants that they heat up water immediately, so then one doesn't have to wait because even Motzei Shabbos, the guy could have heated up immediately. So therefore he gained nothing by doing it for you on Shabbos, and therefore you're allowed to go for bath straight to Motzei Shabbos. Also, hopefully, why? Let's wait. So I'm going to explain first the way we explained it before. That we're talking about a public place, and since it's a public place, therefore they forbade it forever. Esratu, we had it many times before. Esratu is a public throughway. What about the Owen? The Owen is not a public thing. Where he built the Owen right by the Keva. So therefore everybody got to know about it. So therefore, since the guy did it for Yid in the public flaunting of Shabbos, they forbade it forever. That is one malach. A whole different malach in the Gemara is like this. That the Gemara is asking a completely different question. That the halacha is that if a guy makes an on, the Mishnah says that Yid is allowed to use it. Why is the Yid allowed to use it? Because the guy made it for himself. The Gemara, how do you know he made it for himself? Maybe he made it for you. Answers the Gemara that he made it in a throughway where no Yidden ever get buried. Because in the throughway, Yidden don't have to be buried in a throughway. Okay, I can understand. So he can't use his keva because obviously he made it for Goyim, not for Yidden. But the Oron, how do you know he made it for Goyim? Maybe he made it especially for the Yid. The answer is he built the Oron by the keva. So therefore he's obviously showing neither the Oron nor the keva made for Yidden, and that's why you're allowed to use it. It's two completely different malachim as to what point the Gemara is challenging of here. Are we discussing why you're never allowed to use it? Or are we discussing why you're allowed to use it when the Goy makes it for himself? Says the Mishnah. You're allowed to do everything that a dead person needs. Sochin, you can anoint, so you can wash him. You're not allowed to move a limb. Why? And mace is muktzah. You're allowed to touch muktzah. You're allowed to touch a car on Shabbos. You're not allowed to move even a small part of muktzah. It's debatable which level of muktzah is. Pashtus is only kiddush v'lach, by the way, which would mean that you'd actually be allowed to open the car door on Shabbos if you want to sit inside the car on Shabbos. I don't recommend it because you'd be allowed to open it, take it out. Only those who are choshesh, and nowadays, first we've got lights often, electricity, and second of all, it's a shtickle of zilz on Shabbos. But right, so you're right. But let's say something which would be proper muktzah, not like a car. Car's not proper muktzah. Let's say something which is really muktzah, like a camera. You're not even allowed to move a part of it. So a mace is muktzah. So you're allowed to wash him, you're allowed to touch him, but you're not allowed to move a limb because that is muktzah. You can take the pillow underneath him away and put him down on the floor. Sheyamtin means that he should get cooled down. That a dead person gets dried up very quickly. So if you want to put him down on the floor, that he shouldn't get, it should not be moist for longer. It's okay. One's allowed to tie up the cheekbone. Not that the cheekbone should go up, but rather that it shouldn't fall lower. Similarly, if you see one of the beams in the house is falling in, you can support it with a bench or with a bed. Not that you're allowed to push it back up, rather they shouldn't fall down further. The same thing by a mace. You're allowed to tie, with, let's say, put a handkerchief around him so that the jaw does not fall lower, but not that you're allowed to lift it up, because you're not allowed to move muktzah, but rather that it shouldn't fall lower. Says the Gemara that you're allowed to wash a mace. The Gemara is very bothered. How can you possibly wash a mace? The halacha is we don't allow people to wash things on Shabbos. The Gemara. He followed him into the bathhouse. He wanted to rinse the floor. You're not allowed to. To put oil on the ground. Not allowed to. So you see that we don't allow washing and a thing on Shabbos and Yom Tov. One, I haven't understood because we're chayshish for muktzah. So also by mace, why we're allowed to. So God says, no, it's nothing to do with muktzah. If you allow people to wash one ground, they'll wash other ground, even ground that's made out of soil, and you'll do mashva gumus. Mace bekarka lo michlaf. But a dead person with a ground will not get swapped, and since it doesn't get swapped, so therefore you don't need to be chayshish because you're allowed to wash a dead person, not allowed to wash the floor. Washing the floor, you might come to mashva gumus. Washing a dead person, you won't come to do that. Kol asur mai, they're allowed to do everything in the tzorich hameis. Mai lasur the tonah bonon. Maybe in clay maker, you're allowed to bring vessels that cool him down. The clay matcho is a metal. Unichnal kveisoi. You can put it on the stomach dish to fuach in order that it shouldn't get bloated. Or poking this in the cover, you're allowed to block up his holes. Dish because it's been a ruach that air shouldn't go in. But the last parak of Kehelas describes the death process of a human being in great, great, great detail. How different parts of the body decompose, how different parts of the body stop working, how a person finds it hard to walk, everything eventually not able to urinate, all the different things, not able to urinate, not able to relieve himself, all the different parts that happen as a person gets older and older and eventually dies. There's a big question as to why Shlomo HaMelech goes into it in such detail. One of the simple explanations, which the Malbim explains, is that by describing death in such detail, it reminds us of that's where our future lies, and to put it within us a certain amount of fear that we don't live forever. Now, the Gemara in the next daf and two is going to dash in these psukim at great length, and not always easy to get the exact translation. But this is the pasuk says like this: before the silver rope snaps. What is that? The span is a bit like a silver rope because it's made out of bones, which are grayish material, and it's like a rope. But towards gulas hazov, and the golden bowl, that is referring to the ability to urinate, which is like a bowl, and it's yellow liquid. Zeh amo, that's referring to the amo. Which is shobe kadalama bua, and the jug will be smashed against the spring. Zeh chaos, it's the stomach, because you pour liquids into your stomach. The person's stomach. No, it's a gargala boy, and then the wheel of the pit breaks. They perish. That is relieving oneself, because we use Josh the word gal from the word golol. Golol is gloli behema is dung. That the pasuk says that when a person's nifter, Hashem throws the dung over his face. A person, instead of learning Torah, spends his whole life celebrating and partying, then what happens is that Hashem takes the dung and throws it over his face. A person's stomach splits, and it falls onto his face. Take back what you gave me. Is what happens is that all a person indulges in this world, and what happens is the body rejects it and throws it back onto the face of the one who ate so much. Shabbos not allowed to close the eyes of a dead person on Shabbos, of a person dying, of a person who's dead on Shabbos. Why? Because of muktzah. You're not allowed to touch a person as he's dying. But nefesh as a shevich damim, it's a form of murder, because what happens is that the smallest touching can cause a person to be nifta. This big shayla in the poskim is one chay misa. That means, let's say, for example, I was to be eidim and asvo, and you see somebody about to touch the person's eyelids, can you chay misa? The Bible holds yes, it's chay misa. The Radval says there's no chiyuv misa. The Gemara just means over here that it's very bad, but not that there's actual real chiyuv misa. It's like killing. Why? It's a mashal to a candle which is going out. So you've got a candle which is literally flickering, and then you do anything to it, and it straight away goes out. Similarly, when the neshama is literally dead, passing away, anything can cause death. Let's say a person on Shabbos wants that the eyes should close because he's already dead. So what should he do? You can't touch the eyelids because it's muktzah. You blow wine into his nostrils, you put oil between his eyelids. You grasp the two big thumbs, the foot, big toes, and the eyes will close on their own. A baby one day old Shabbos. David Melech he saw mace Ein lechalel on lovas Shabbos. Still, when Yomi lechalel lovas Shabbos, omoter lechalel lovas Shabbos achas, kadesh yishmer Shabbos es harbe. Da ben ich so meis. Ein lechalel on lov, given shemeis Adam, bottom in a mitzvah. Zanu da bevichnon b'meis mechavshi, given shemeis Adam nasi chavshi na mitzvahs. When a person dies, he becomes free from all mitzvahs. The famous story of the Vilna Gaon, that as he was dying, he picked up his tzitzis and he said, in this world, with a few pennies, a person is able to buy tzitzis strings and be zeichet to netzach netzachim. And in the next world, with all the good intentions that person can have, he can't anymore do any more mitzvahs. Since the Gemara discussed this point, the difference between life and death, the Gemara carries on in this vein. Mice and weasels do not touch a baby one day old. And the more dashes chitchem can also mean fear, but can also mean chiyuschem, life. There's fear, moirachem is vechitchem, while there's life, there's fear. Once the person dies, the fear has gone away. A lion never attacks two human beings at the same time. We see that sometimes a lion attacks a human being at two human beings at the same time. And says, well, only when a person's done averos, that's what the Maharsha explains. And because a person's done averos, a human being doesn't look anymore like a human being, but he looks more like an animal, then he thinks to himself he's attacking two animals. A lion will attack two animals, but will never attack two human beings. He won't rest. Nimshal, literal translation, he's compared, like the word moshel, that's the partial translation. The more over here saying Nimshal, that the animals rule over him. Why? Because he's similar to animals. When a person behaves like an animal, then animals, lions, feel free to attack. The Chachma Musa says unbelievable whole shtickle. Over here we say the more saying that lions don't attack human beings. But when they see human beings only as lowly animals, then they attack. He says, what's the Gemara trying to teach us? The Gemara is trying to teach us, how could it be that people are so cruel to each other? Where did they get it within themselves? The answer is, they don't look properly at the other person. If you would see how the other person is suffering, you won't be able to be so cruel. And that's what Gemara is trying to show. The lion won't be able to attack a human being. It's only because he doesn't see him properly, does he feel free to attack him. It's a bit of a drush, but he says, this is what's the Gemara trying to teach me otherwise? So the Gemara is trying to teach me that you can only harm others when you don't actually look properly to see what their needs are. Says the Gemara, not allowed to sleep in the house alone. Lilis was the mother of all shadim, and therefore, if a person sleeps by himself in the house, he gets shadim. Some say if a person got sfarim in the room, it's okay, but it's brought down in halacha. You shouldn't sleep in the house by yourself. Do mitzvahs while you find the opportunity, or while you have the ability. That means while you've got somebody in front of you, and while you've got while you're still in your own reshus, meaning you haven't died, a person hasn't died. Before the days are bad, that's old age where a person is unable to do mitzvahs. Years will come where you'll have no desire. When Mashiach comes, there'll be no opportunities to do mitzvahs. So it'll be on some level years because there's no ability to conquer the Yetzer Hara. Or Pliga de Shmuel, we had this many times. That Shmuel holds that when Mashiach comes, the world won't change, except the fact that Klal Yisrael will be the most powerful nation, and all the nations in the world will have to serve us. And therefore, there will still be the opportunity to do mitzvahs and to be able to give tzedakah to the poor. But this price says no, that when Mashiach comes, there will be no more mitzvahs and no more averos, all Bechir will be finished. Now that we've mentioned poverty, the Gemara talks a little bit about poverty. A person should always daven not to become poor. Why? If a person himself never becomes poor, his sons come. If not, his son, his grandson. That means within 3 generations, says the Maharsha, there'll always be a family. Every family within every 3 generations will be poverty. Says the Mashal, we see that's not true. Sometimes you have families where the money goes for more than 3 generations. He says that's either the schus avos or special tefillahs. But generally speaking, every 3 generations will always be poverty. Shnema, Glal normally translation is because. The Gemara also translates it, it's a cyclical pattern that exists in this world, that a person gets rich, next family gets poor, and therefore a person should always daven that he should be zeicha to that they should get into poverty. Never gets poor. Never become poor. We see Talmidei Chacham do become poor. As well, he said, "It doesn't need to go collecting. People bring him money, and because of that, they respect him. So therefore, even though Talmidei Chacham do get poor, but they never have to go knocking from door to door." Chir said to his wife, "When a more poor man comes, give him bread quickly, in order that when your sons go collecting, they'll also get bread quickly. You're cursing your sons that'll be collecting bread." It's a pasuk. It's a circle that goes in the world. It's not like I'm cursing them. It's a fact that eventually my children will become poor. And since eventually they become poor, I want, just like you treat others nicely, they should be treated nicely. When the son if person has rachmanos on others, Hashem has rachmanos on him. Person has no rachmanos on others, Hashem has no rachmanos on him. In Das Tvunas Chelek Aleph, it discusses this Gemara quite great length. It's always confined base if you want to look it up. A very interesting Das Tvunas, very deep. It goes like this, very briefly. He says like this. Doesn't mean that if I'm rachim on my poor man, I give him £1, Hashem will give me back £1. Doesn't mean that. He says because the Gemara uses by Yehuda Nossi, was a very big tzaddik, it didn't deserve punishment. It means like this. The Akash has different methods of ruling the world. He's got midas rachim, midas hadin. If a person has rachmanos on others, then what happens is Akadosh Baruch Hu from then on treats him only through the middle of rachmanos, and he has joined a different kind of pathway from others. He's considered in a different group of others. So it's not according to the amount that he's merachim, but once a person has rachmanos on others, so now Akash Baruch Hu has taken him away from the category of those that get punished, the category of those that get rachmanos, and he's promised that he'll only have good things. Now we're going to dash more and more psukim of Koheles. Before the sun sets. This is referring to Zupatachas va'achotim. It's referring to the forehead and the nose. When a person is alive and vibrant, his forehead shines. When he gets very old and dies, then his forehead looks dark. So that when the pasuk in Koheles says that before the sun sets, it's referring to before death, when the forehead gets dark. Vayoreach, the moon sets, Zu neshama. The neshama is bright like the moon, and that's when the moon sets. The stars, Edu Alestos, it's the cheeks. The cheeks also, when the person's vibrant and alive, they light up. The person dies, they're no longer. The clouds go away from the rain. The Gemara says that the person who cries becomes blind. Crying, the tears damage eyesight. Similarly, when a person cries, the clouds of rain eventually clears away the clouds. So when the pasuk says the clouds that come away after the rain, it's referring to the sight that's lost after the tears. Crying till a person's 40 years old, the sight will still improve. If a person cries over the age of 40, his sight will never come back. In the older days, they used to be very busy with eye medication. And they always used to use this tiny, what do you use for an earbud, in a tiny tube, because the Gemara many times talks about a thin thing going into a tube, which had which is the eye tube going into the stick going into a tube. So he says like this: till 40 years old, eye medication help. Once a person's 40, even if a person uses a very, very thick piece of wood to apply the eye medication to his eye, or make the eye stay well, but will not heal. It says, the thicker the applicator for the eye medication is, the better. That means it's better to use a very lot of eye medication. The thicker the tube a person uses, the thicker the applicator is, the better. Chanina's daughter died. You didn't cry about her. You're not crying. Is it like a chicken left your house? Why are you not crying? Why are you not upset about it? Should I suffer two things? Should I suffer two things, both losing my child and I should get blind? By crying, a person gets blinded. So if I don't want to suffer more than I've already suffered. There's 6 kinds of tears. 3 which are healthy, 3 which are unhealthy. And the more explains, Shal Oshon from clouds, Vishal Bechi from smoke, Vishal Bechi from crying, Vishal Kissing, on top of Kafnun Beis Amudalef. The person goes to the bathroom and he's in pain, he can cry. So those tears, voice, they cause harm. Shall sound from medication. Vishal Schoik from laughter, Vishal Peros that come from the smell of onions or mustard, Yafos, those are healthy. So when you're grating the mower and after Pesach, you should be happy that you're crying. But crying for other reasons like smoke, and crying, that's no good. And they're carrying on the psukim of Peres. On the day that the pillars of the house get shake. It's referring to the flanks, that they start shaking, and the ribs. The people of the army refer to the thighs. The grinders, that is referring to the teeth, that they can't grind anymore. And those that see in the windows go dark, that's referring to the eyes. He asked him, why don't you come to Beis Avidon? This place used to have long discussions. The mountain's gone white. Around it is gone like snow. The dogs have stopped barking. And the grinders don't grind. So the snowy mountain is meaning that his hair had gone white. The snow around the mountain is referring to the beard and to all the other hair of the body that's also gone white. The bog's not barking. That is referring to the fact that when a person's old, he loses his voice. The teeth not grinding, the grinders not grinding is referring to the teeth. The Rav Omi, that which I haven't lost, I look for. So there's 2 explanations over here. Old people, they walk very, very slowly, shuffling, looking down. So when people watch them, what do they think? That they're searching for something on the floor. So therefore, an old person is always looks like he's looking for a lost item. So that's what he said, to refer to himself. Instead of saying I'm old, he just said I look like I'm looking for something which I have lost. Alternatively, like this, old people's memory goes. And what happens is, they look for things which they haven't really lost. And the Meiri says they can be holding something in their hand and they're still looking for it. So that's what it means. It's something which I haven't lost, I'm still looking for. It's better to have 2 legs than 3 legs. Did anybody explain that? Why is it better to have 2 legs than 3 legs? It's better to be young and walk on 2 legs than to be old and have 2 legs plus a cane. Because at the end of the day, you walk better with 2 legs than with 3 legs. Woe to that which goes and never comes back. Youth is gone and never comes back. You also have youth is like a crown made out of roses. Savusa, old age, is a crown made out of thorns. That means youth is very geschmack, old age is not. If you chew well with your teeth, then when you're walking, you'll have extra strength. As a person chews, you digest the food better. You won't see bad. When the person eats properly, it's very healthy. For the first 40 years of your life, open up your belt and eat lots of bread. Because food is healthy. Once a person is 40, it is healthier to drink than to eat. It's more healthy. Once a person is over the age of 40, drinking has more health benefits than eating. Okay, the next Gemara goes on a little bit, so we'll stop over here. Get time for Mincha. I know it's quite a hard Gemara in the sense that it's a bit depressing.